Maya Rodriguez never thought a bicycle helmet could change her life. She was 26, working as a physical therapy assistant at Riverside Medical Center and training for her first century ride, a 100-mile cycling challenge that would raise money for pediatric cancer research. The cause was personal. Her younger brother Diego had battled leukemia at age 12, and though he'd won that fight, the family never forgot the kindness of the medical staff who'd helped them through those dark months. The helmet wasn't special to look at, standard black with silver vents, nothing fancy. But inside, tucked between the foam padding and the hard shell, was a letter that Diego had written to her 6 months earlier. He'd been heading off to college, and in typical little brother fashion, he'd wanted to do something both embarrassing and meaningful. The letter talked about how proud he was of her dedication to helping others, how he'd watched her work through her own struggles with anxiety and self-doubt, and how he knew she could accomplish anything she set her mind to. Maya had discovered the letter by accident one day when her helmet's padding had come loose during a routine maintenance check. She'd cried reading it, then carefully tucked it back into its hiding spot. Since then, she'd touched that section of her helmet before every training ride, drawing strength from Diego's words when the miles got tough or when her legs screamed for her to quit. The training had been going well. Maya had built up her endurance gradually, following a structured program that took her from 30-mile weekend rides to 60-mile adventures through the rolling hills outside their suburban Phoenix home. She joined the Cactus Cycling Club, where she'd met other riders preparing for the same event. The camaraderie was infectious, and for the first time in years, Maya felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. Her supervisor at work, Dr. Patricia Collins, had been supportive at first. She'd even made a small donation to Maya's fundraising page and had seemed genuinely interested in her progress. But as Maya's training intensified and she occasionally needed to adjust her work schedule to accommodate longer rides or recovery time, Dr. Collins' attitude began to shift. Small comments about priorities and commitment to the job started creeping into their conversations. Maya tried to brush off the subtle criticisms. She was careful never to let her training interfere with patient care, and she always made sure her work was completed to the highest standard. Her colleagues knew they could count on her, and several had even expressed interest in joining her training group. But Dr. Collins seemed to view Maya's cycling as a frivolous distraction rather than a meaningful pursuit. The Century ride was scheduled for early October, just as the brutal Arizona summer was finally giving way to more manageable temperatures. Maya had been looking forward to it for months, visualizing herself crossing the finish line with the knowledge that every mile had contributed to a cause close to her heart. She had no idea that her helmet and the precious letter hidden inside would soon become the center of a conflict that would test everything she believed about standing up for what's right. The morning of September 15th started like any other training day. Maya had planned a 70-mile ride through the desert preserve, her longest distance yet. She'd prepared meticulously the night before, checking her bike, filling her water bottles, and laying out her gear. The alarm went off at 5:30, and she was on the road by 6:15, just as the sun was painting the saguaro cacti in shades of gold and pink. The first 40 miles felt effortless. Maya's legs were strong, her breathing steady, and her confidence soaring. She'd been battling some self-doubt lately about whether she was really ready for the century ride, but this morning's performance was proving that all those months of training had been worth it. She could feel Diego's letter in her helmet, a constant reminder of his belief in her capabilities. The accident happened on a technical descent about 50 miles into the ride. Maya was navigating a series of tight switchbacks when a loose rock sent her front wheel sliding sideways. She tried to correct, but the bike's momentum carried her off the trail and down a steep embankment. The fall seemed to happen in slow motion. She remembered the sensation of flying through the air, the impact with the rocky ground, and the sound of her bike clattering against the desert stones. When Maya finally came to rest, she was battered and shaken but miraculously not seriously injured. Her cycling shorts were torn, her left elbow was scraped raw, and her shoulder ached from the impact. But as she sat up and took inventory of her condition, her heart sank. Her helmet was nowhere to be seen. She looked up the embankment and spotted it about 20 feet away, cracked open like an egg, with pieces of foam padding scattered across the desert floor. Maya scrambled up the slope, ignoring the pain in her shoulder and the sting of her scraped elbow. She gathered the helmet fragments frantically, searching through the debris for any sign of Diego's letter. But the impact had destroyed the padding completely, and the paper was gone, likely blown away by the desert wind or buried somewhere in the rocky terrain. She spent the next hour combing through every crevice and behind every boulder, becoming increasingly desperate as the reality sank in. The letter was gone, and with it, her most treasured source of motivation. The physical pain from the crash was nothing compared to the emotional devastation of losing Diego's words. She'd never told him about finding the letter, never thanked him for the gift of his encouragement when she'd needed it most. Finally, with tears streaming down her face and her water supply running low, Maya had to accept defeat. She called for a ride home, loaded her damaged bike into her friend's car, and spent the rest of the day in a fog of grief and disappointment. That evening, she sat in her apartment staring at the fragments of her helmet, wondering if she should just withdraw from the century ride. The next morning at work, Maya was still processing the loss when Dr. Collins called her into the office. Maya had hoped for some sympathy, maybe even some encouragement about continuing her training despite the setback. Instead, Dr. Collins delivered news that made the helmet incident seem trivial by comparison. I've been thinking about your request for time off for that bike race, Dr. Collins said, not looking up from her computer screen. I'm going to have to deny it. We're short-staffed that weekend and I need everyone here. I hope you understand that your job has to come first. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. She'd submitted the request 3 months ago, and Dr. Collins had verbally approved it. Maya had been fundraising for months, had trained for nearly a year, and had made commitments to her sponsors and supporters. The Century Ride wasn't just a personal goal anymore. It was a promise to her brother, to the Cancer Research Foundation, and to herself. But Dr. Collins, you approved this months ago, Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. I have people depending on me. I've raised over $3,000 for pediatric cancer research. This isn't just about me. Dr. Collins finally looked up, her expression cold and dismissive. Plans change, Maya. I'm sure your little bike club will understand. There will be other races. But right now, I need you here doing your actual job, not playing around with hobbies. The word hobbies hit Maya like a physical blow. This wasn't a hobby, it was a mission, a tribute to her brother's strength, and a way to give back to the community that had supported their family during their darkest time. But as she looked at Dr. Collins' impassive face, Maya realized that explaining the deeper meaning would be pointless. Her supervisor had already made up her mind. Maya left the office feeling more defeated than she had even after losing the helmet. At least the crash had been an accident, a random misfortune that she could eventually overcome. But this felt like a deliberate betrayal, a calculated dismissal of everything she'd worked toward. As she went through the motions of her workday, helping patients and maintaining her professional demeanor, Maya's mind was racing with questions about fairness, loyalty, and what it meant to stand up for yourself when the people in power didn't care about your dreams. That evening, Maya called Diego at college. She hadn't planned to tell him about the helmet or the letter, but the combination of losing his words and facing Dr. Collins' ultimatum had left her feeling more vulnerable than she'd felt in years. She needed her brother's wisdom, even if he didn't know about the hidden message he'd given her. Diego, I need to ask you something, Maya said after they'd exchanged the usual pleasantries. Do you remember what you said to me before you left for college? About believing in myself and not letting other people's limitations define what I could accomplish. Diego was quiet for a moment, then laughed softly. Maya, I said a lot of things before I left. Most of them were probably pretty cheesy. But yeah, I remember telling you that you were stronger than you knew. Why? What's going on? Maya found herself telling him everything about the training, about the fundraising, about the crash and the lost helmet, and finally about Dr. Collins' betrayal. She didn't mention the letter. That secret felt too precious to share, even with Diego. But as she talked, She felt some of the weight lifting from her shoulders. "You know what this reminds me of," Diego said when she finished. "Remember when I was in treatment and that one nurse kept telling me I was too weak to go to the activity room? She said I needed to accept my limitations and stop pushing myself. But you and Mom kept encouraging me to keep trying, to keep fighting for every small victory." Maya remembered that nurse, a bitter woman who seemed to view the children's optimism as a personal affront. "Mrs. Henderson, she was horrible." "Right, and remember what you told me about her. You said that some people get so comfortable with their own limitations that they try to impose them on everyone else. You said I should never let someone else's lack of vision become my ceiling." The words hit Maya like lightning. She'd completely forgotten giving Diego that advice, but hearing it reflected back to her now felt like finding the lost letter all over again. Maybe she didn't need the physical reminder of Diego's encouragement. Maybe she'd been carrying his strength with her all along, and her own wisdom too. "Diego, I think I know what I need to do," Maya said. "Whatever it is, I'm behind you 100%. And Maya, I know I don't say it enough, but I'm proud of you. Not just for the cycling thing, but for everything. You've always been the one who showed me what it means to keep going when things get tough." After they hung up, Maya sat in her apartment and made a decision. She wasn't going to let Dr. Collins' selfishness destroy months of preparation and thousands of dollars in pledged donations. She was going to ride in the Century, with or without permission. But first, she was going to make sure Dr. Collins understood exactly what she was trying to destroy. The next morning, Maya arrived at work early and spent time documenting everything she could remember about her interactions with Dr. Collins regarding the time-off request. She printed out emails, gathered witness statements from colleagues who'd heard the verbal approval, and created a detailed timeline of events. She also researched the hospital's policies on approved time off and employee rights. What she found was encouraging. According to the employee handbook, verbally approved time off could only be revoked in cases of genuine emergency or if the employee had violated the terms of their agreement. Maya had done neither. She'd submitted her request through proper channels, had received approval, and had maintained her work performance throughout her training period. Armed with this information, Maya requested another meeting with Dr. Collins. This time, she wasn't going to plead or explain. She was going to present facts and demand fair treatment. "Dr. Collins, I've reviewed the hospital's policies regarding approved time off," Maya began, placing her documentation on the supervisor's desk. "According to Section 4 of the Employee Handbook, my time-off request was properly submitted and approved. I have email confirmation and witness statements supporting this." Dr. Collins glanced at the papers dismissively. "Maya, I don't have time for this. I've made my decision. The discussion is over." "Actually, it's not over," Maya said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I'm filing a grievance with Human Resources. I've also documented several instances where you've made disparaging comments about my cycling activities, despite the fact that they've never interfered with my job performance." For the first time, Dr. Collins looked genuinely concerned. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm informing you that I intend to exercise my rights as an employee. I've worked here for 3 years without a single negative performance review. I've covered extra shifts, trained new employees, and gone above and beyond in my patient care. The only reason you're denying my approved time off is because you don't approve of my personal activities." Dr. Collins leaned back in her chair, her expression hardening. "Fine, take your time off, but don't expect any special treatment going forward. I'll be watching your performance very closely." Maya felt a surge of triumph, but it was tempered by the realization that she'd probably made an enemy of her supervisor. Still, she'd stood up for herself and won. As she left the office, she thought about Diego's words and her own advice to him years ago. Some people really did try to impose their limitations on others, but that didn't mean you had to accept them. The victory felt hollow, though. Maya knew that Dr. Collins' threat wasn't empty. She would be looking for any excuse to make Maya's work life difficult. But as Maya returned to her duties, she reminded herself that she'd faced bigger challenges than a vindictive supervisor. She'd helped her brother through cancer treatment, had overcome her own anxiety and self-doubt, and had built herself into a cyclist capable of riding 100 miles for charity. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Collins made good on her promise to watch Maya closely. She nitpicked minor details, questioned Maya's decisions, and generally made the work environment as uncomfortable as possible. Maya's colleagues noticed the hostility and several offered their support, but Maya was careful not to involve them in what had become a personal conflict. The harassment reached a peak 2 weeks before the Century ride. Maya was working with a pediatric patient who reminded her strongly of Diego, a 10-year-old boy recovering from a broken leg who was frustrated by his slow progress. Maya was encouraging him to keep trying, explaining that healing takes time and that every small improvement was worth celebrating. "You're very good with him," said the boy's mother after the session. "Tommy's been struggling with his confidence since the accident. You seem to understand what he needs to hear." Maya was touched by the compliment, but her moment of satisfaction was interrupted by Dr. Collins' voice behind her. "Maya, I need to see you in my office, now." In the office, Dr. Collins was holding a printed email. "I've received a complaint about your behavior with patients. It seems you've been sharing inappropriate personal information and overstepping your professional boundaries." Maya was stunned. "What are you talking about? I would never." The complaint says you've been telling patients about your personal athletic activities and trying to relate your own experiences to their medical situations. That's completely inappropriate and potentially harmful. Maya realized what had happened. Dr. Collins had been monitoring her interactions with patients, looking for any excuse to build a case against her. The conversation with Tommy's mother had been twisted into evidence of unprofessional behavior. "Dr. Collins, I was encouraging a frustrated child. I never discussed my personal life inappropriately. If you have specific concerns about my patient interactions, I'd like to know exactly what was said and when." The details don't matter. What matters is that you're not maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. I'm issuing you a formal written warning. Any further complaints will result in suspension. Maya felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. This wasn't just about time off anymore. Dr. Collins was actively trying to sabotage her career. The written warning would go in her personnel file and could affect future job opportunities and references. "I'd like to speak with HR about this," Maya said. "That's your right, but the warning stands. And Maya, I'd be very careful about your attitude going forward. You're walking on thin ice." As Maya left the office, she was shaking with anger and frustration. She'd won the battle over time off, but Dr. Collins was escalating the war. The written warning was a serious threat to her career, and Maya knew that her supervisor wouldn't stop there. That evening, Maya sat in her apartment staring at the fragments of her broken helmet. She'd kept them on her dresser as a reminder of the crash, but now they seemed to symbolize something different. The way that something precious could be destroyed by forces beyond your control, leaving you to figure out how to move forward without it. She thought about Diego's letter and wished she could read his words of encouragement one more time. But then she remembered their recent phone conversation and her own advice to him during his treatment. Maybe the letter had been destroyed, but the wisdom it contained was still with her. She'd been carrying it all along, not in her helmet but in her heart. Maya picked up her phone and dialed the number for the hospital's HR department. If Dr. Collins wanted to play hardball, Maya was ready to show her what real determination looked like. She'd learned from her brother that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with strength, but with persistence, not with force, but with an unwavering commitment to what's right. The next morning, Maya met with Janet Walsh, the HR director. Janet was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s who'd been with the hospital for over 20 years. She listened carefully as Maya explained the situation, occasionally taking notes and asking clarifying questions. "I have to tell you, Maya, this is concerning," Janet said when Maya finished. "Dr. Collins is certainly within her rights to manage her department, but some of what you're describing sounds like potential retaliation. The timing of the written warning, coming right after you filed a grievance, is particularly troubling. Maya felt a glimmer of hope. What can be done about it? I'm going to need to investigate this thoroughly. I'll need to interview the patient and family mentioned in the complaint, review your personnel file, and speak with your colleagues about your work performance. In the meantime, I want you to document any further incidents with Dr. Collins. Times, dates, witnesses, everything. Maya left the HR office feeling more optimistic than she had in weeks. For the first time, someone in authority was taking her concerns seriously. But she also knew that investigations took time, and the Century ride was less than 2 weeks away. Over the next few days, Maya continued her training while carefully documenting every interaction with Dr. Collins. Her supervisor seemed to sense that something had changed, and her harassment became more subtle but no less persistent. She would assign Maya to the most difficult patients, schedule her for the least desirable shifts, and find fault with work that had previously been acceptable. Maya's colleagues began to notice the pattern. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, one of the staff physicians, pulled Maya aside after a particularly tense shift. Maya, I don't know what's going on between you and Dr. Collins, but I want you to know that your work hasn't suffered. You're still one of the best PTs we have, and the patients love you. Don't let whatever this is affect your confidence. The support from Dr. Martinez and others helped Maya maintain her professionalism, but the stress was taking its toll. She found herself second-guessing every decision, overanalyzing every patient interaction, and losing sleep over the possibility that Dr. Collins might find another excuse to write her up. A week before the Century ride, Maya was working with an elderly patient who'd had hip replacement surgery. The woman was struggling with her exercises and becoming increasingly frustrated with her slow progress. I just don't think I can do this, the patient said, tears forming in her eyes. Maybe I'm too old. Maybe I should just accept that I'll never walk normally again. Maya felt a familiar surge of compassion. This was exactly the kind of moment that had drawn her to physical therapy in the first place. The chance to help someone rediscover their strength and hope. Mrs. Patterson, I understand how frustrating this must be, Maya said gently. But I've seen patients older than you make incredible recoveries. The key is to focus on small improvements and celebrate every victory, no matter how small it seems. But what if I can't do it? What if I'm not strong enough? Maya thought about Diego's battle with cancer, about her own struggle to complete long training rides, about the crash that had destroyed her helmet and the letter inside it. She thought about standing up to Dr. Collins despite the risk to her career. Mrs. Patterson, strength isn't about being perfect or never falling down. It's about getting back up every time you fall. It's about refusing to let other people's limitations become your ceiling. The words came out naturally, and Maya realized she was quoting herself from years ago. But hearing them now, in this context, felt like a revelation. She'd been so focused on losing Diego's letter that she'd forgotten her own capacity for wisdom and encouragement. Mrs. Patterson smiled through her tears. "You know what? You're right. Let's try the exercise again." Maya was helping Mrs. Patterson through her routine when she noticed Dr. Collins standing in the doorway, watching with a calculating expression. Maya's heart sank. She'd been careful to keep the conversation focused on the patient's medical situation, but she knew that Dr. Collins could twist anything into evidence of inappropriate behavior. After Mrs. Patterson left, Dr. Collins approached Maya's workstation. "I observed your interaction with Mrs. Patterson. You seem to be sharing personal philosophies rather than focusing on clinical care." Maya took a deep breath. "I was encouraging a patient who was losing hope. That's part of effective therapy." "That's not for you to decide. You're a physical therapy assistant, not a counselor. I'm noting this incident in your file." Maya watched Dr. Collins walk away and felt something shift inside her. She'd been trying to appease her supervisor, to find a way to coexist peacefully while maintaining her integrity. But Dr. Collins wasn't interested in coexistence. She was determined to destroy Maya's career out of petty spite. That evening, Maya called Diego again. This time, she told him everything about the letter she'd found in her helmet, about losing it in the crash, about the escalating conflict with Dr. Collins. "Maya, I can't believe you kept that letter all this time," Diego said. "But you know what? I think losing it might have been the best thing that could have happened." "How can you say that? It was the most important thing I owned." "Because now you know that the strength was never in the letter. It was in you all along. You didn't need my words to stand up to that supervisor. You didn't need them to train for the Century ride or to help that patient today. You've been carrying that strength with you your whole life." Maya felt tears forming in her eyes. "I miss having your encouragement, though. The letter made me feel like you believed in me." "Maya, I do believe in you. I always have. But more importantly, you need to believe in yourself. The person who wrote that letter learned about courage and determination from watching you. Everything I said in that letter was just reflecting back what you'd already shown me." After they hung up, Maya sat in her apartment looking at the fragments of her broken helmet. Instead of loss, she now saw possibility. The helmet had served its purpose. It had protected her during the crash, just as Diego's letter had protected her confidence during training. But both had been preparation for something bigger. Maya picked up her phone and began typing an email to Janet Walsh in HR. She'd been documenting Dr. Collins' harassment for weeks, but now she realized she'd been thinking about the situation all wrong. This wasn't just about getting her supervisor to back down. It was about making sure that Dr. Collins couldn't treat other employees the same way. The email was detailed and professional, outlining every incident of retaliation and harassment. Maya attached her documentation and requested a formal investigation. She also requested that the written warning be removed from her file, as it was clearly retaliatory and based on false accusations. As she sent the email, Maya felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in weeks. She was finally fighting back not just for herself, but for every employee who might face Dr. Collins' arbitrary cruelty in the future. The next morning, Maya arrived at work to find a message from Janet Walsh asking her to come to HR. When she arrived, she found Dr. Collins already sitting in the conference room, looking uncomfortable and angry. "Maya, thank you for coming," Janet said. "I've completed my investigation into your concerns about Dr. Collins' conduct. I've interviewed the patient and family mentioned in the complaint against you, and they had nothing but positive things to say about your care. Mrs. Patterson specifically mentioned how much your encouragement helped her recovery." Dr. Collins shifted in her seat. "I stand by my assessment of Maya's conduct. She overstepped her boundaries." According to the patient and her family, Maya provided exactly the kind of support they needed. "I've also reviewed Maya's personnel file and found no pattern of inappropriate behavior. In fact, her performance reviews have been consistently excellent until very recently." Janet turned to Dr. Collins. "Dr. Collins, I'm concerned about the timing of this complaint and the written warning. Both occurred after Maya filed a grievance about your denial of her approved time off. This creates an appearance of retaliation." "I resent the implication that I would retaliate against an employee. I was simply doing my job." "Your job is to manage your department fairly and professionally. Denying approved time off without cause and issuing unwarranted disciplinary actions doesn't meet that standard." Maya watched Dr. Collins' face redden with anger and embarrassment. For the first time since this whole conflict began, her supervisor was the one on the defensive. "Dr. Collins, I'm issuing you a formal reprimand for retaliatory behavior," Janet continued. "The written warning against Maya is being removed from her file, and her approved time off is confirmed. Any further incidents of this nature will result in more serious disciplinary action." Dr. Collins stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. I'm being punished for trying to maintain professional standards." "You're being held accountable for your actions," Janet said firmly. "I trust this won't happen again." After Dr. Collins left, Janet turned to Maya. "I'm sorry you had to go through this. No employee should face retaliation for exercising their rights. Maya felt a mixture of relief and vindication. She'd stood up for herself and won, but more importantly, she'd helped establish a precedent that might protect other employees in the future. "Thank you for taking this seriously," Maya said. "I was starting to think I was overreacting." "You weren't overreacting. You were protecting yourself and potentially others. That takes courage." As Maya left the HR office, she thought about courage and what it really meant. She'd always thought of it as something dramatic and heroic, but now she understood that real courage was often quiet and persistent. It was continuing to do the right thing even when it was difficult, standing up for yourself even when it was scary, and refusing to let other people's limitations become your ceiling. The day of the Century ride dawned clear and cool, perfect conditions for cycling. Maya arrived at the starting area early, her new helmet secured firmly on her head. She decorated it with a small sticker that read, "For Diego," a public acknowledgement of the private motivation she'd carried all along. As she warmed up, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd lost Diego's letter, but she'd found something more valuable: the knowledge that she'd been carrying his strength and her own wisdom with her all along. She'd faced down a workplace bully and won, not through aggression but through persistence and principle. The starting horn sounded, and Maya began pedaling alongside hundreds of other riders. The first miles passed quickly, the peloton moving as one through the desert landscape. Maya felt strong and confident, her months of training evident in her smooth cadence and steady breathing. As the miles accumulated, Maya found herself thinking about all the people who'd supported her journey. Diego, obviously, but also her cycling club friends, her coworkers who'd stood up for her, and even Janet Walsh, who'd ensured that justice was served. She thought about Mrs. Patterson and all the other patients who'd taught her that healing required both physical therapy and emotional encouragement. At mile 50, Maya passed the spot where she'd crashed during training. She touched her helmet briefly, no longer mourning the lost letter but celebrating the strength she'd discovered within herself. The broken helmet fragments were still on her dresser at home, but they no longer represented loss, they represented transformation. The final miles of the Century ride were the hardest. Maya's legs burned, her back ached, and every pedal stroke required conscious effort. But she kept going, drawing on reserves of determination she'd built not just through training but through standing up to Dr. Collins and refusing to let someone else's limitations define her potential. As Maya crossed the finish line, she was overwhelmed with emotion. She'd completed her goal, raised money for pediatric cancer research, and proven to herself that she could overcome any obstacle. But more than that, she'd learned that the most important battles aren't always fought on the road. Sometimes they're fought in conference rooms and hospital corridors, in the quiet moments when you decide whether to give up or keep fighting. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Diego. Saw your finish time online. I'm so proud of you. Not just for the ride, but for everything. Maya smiled through her tears. She'd lost the letter, but she'd gained something infinitely more valuable. The knowledge that she'd always been strong enough to overcome any challenge. The courage had been there all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge. As she packed up her bike and prepared to head home, Maya thought about returning to work on Monday. Dr. Collins would still be there, probably still resentful about the disciplinary action. But Maya wasn't worried. She'd faced down her supervisor's worst behavior and emerged victorious. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready for them. The helmet on her head no longer contained a hidden letter, but it carried something even more powerful. The memories of a journey that had taught her the true meaning of strength, courage, and persistence. And that was a treasure that could never be lost or destroyed. Maya Rodriguez climbed into her car and drove home, already planning her next cycling adventure. She discovered that the best way to honor Diego's belief in her wasn't to carry his words in her helmet, but to live them out in her daily life. The letter was gone, but the legacy of strength and determination it had inspired would last forever. The following Monday, Maya returned to work with a new sense of confidence. Dr. Collins was notably distant and professional, clearly chastened by the HR investigation. Maya's colleagues welcomed her back warmly, and several asked about the Century ride. The atmosphere in the department was noticeably more positive. Over the next few weeks, Maya noticed other changes in the workplace. Dr. Collins seemed to be making an effort to be fairer in her management style, perhaps realizing that her previous behavior had been inappropriate. Maya wondered if other employees had benefited from her willingness to stand up to the bullying. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly patient Maya had encouraged, made remarkable progress in her recovery. During one of their sessions, she told Maya, "You know, what you said about not letting other people's limitations become your ceiling really stuck with me. I've been applying that to more than just my physical therapy." Maya smiled, recognizing the phrase she'd once used with Diego and had somehow forgotten until she'd needed it most. "That's wonderful, Mrs. Patterson. How are you feeling about your progress?" "Like I'm finally getting my life back. And I owe a lot of that to you believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." As Maya helped Mrs. Patterson through her exercises, she realized that the cycle of encouragement and strength had come full circle. She'd learned courage from Diego, taught it to herself, and was now passing it on to others. The letter in her helmet had been just one link in a chain of inspiration that stretched far beyond any single piece of paper. That evening, Maya called Diego with an update on Mrs. Patterson's progress. "It's amazing how much difference it makes when someone believes in you," she said. "Speaking of which," Diego said, "I have something to tell you. I've been thinking about what you said about standing up to that supervisor, and it inspired me to make some changes in my own life." Maya was intrigued. "What kind of changes?" "I've been dealing with a roommate situation that was making me miserable. The guy was a slob, never paid his share of bills, and was generally making my life hell. I'd been putting up with it because I didn't want to cause conflict. But after hearing how you handled Dr. Collins, I realized I was letting someone else's dysfunction define my living situation." "What did you do?" "I had a serious conversation with him about expectations and boundaries. When that didn't work, I started looking for a new place. I'm moving out next month, and I couldn't be happier about it." Maya felt a surge of pride. "Diego, that's fantastic. It's not always easy to stand up for yourself, but it's worth it. I learned that from watching you. The letter I hid in your helmet wasn't just about believing in your cycling goals. It was about believing in your ability to handle whatever life threw at you. You've proven that in ways I never could have imagined." As they talked, Maya realized that the crash that had destroyed her helmet and the letter inside it had actually been a gift. It had forced her to discover that the strength she'd been seeking in Diego's words had been inside her all along. She'd needed to lose the external reminder to find the internal reality. A month later, Maya received an unexpected email from Dr. Collins. She opened it cautiously, unsure what to expect. "Maya," the message read, "I want to apologize for my behavior over the past few months. I realize now that my actions were unprofessional and unfair. Your commitment to your patients and your personal goals is admirable, and I should have supported you rather than undermining you. I hope we can work together more positively going forward." Maya read the email twice, surprised by its sincerity. She'd expected Dr. Collins to remain resentful indefinitely, but perhaps the HR investigation had prompted some genuine self-reflection. Maya wrote a brief, professional response accepting the apology and expressing her commitment to maintaining a positive work environment. The next day, Dr. Collins approached Maya during her lunch break. "I wanted to speak with you in person about the email," she said. "I know I put you through a lot of unnecessary stress, and I'm genuinely sorry." Maya studied her supervisor's face, looking for signs of insincerity but finding none. "I appreciate that, Dr. Collins. I hope we can move forward constructively." "I'd like to ask you something," Dr. Collins continued. "How did you find the courage to stand up to me? I know I was being unreasonable, but most people would have just given up or found another job." Maya considered the question. I think I learned that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risk at all. If I just accepted the situation, I would have lost something important to me, and you might have continued treating other employees the same way. Dr. Collins nodded slowly. You're probably right. I think I'd gotten comfortable with my authority and forgot that it comes with responsibility to treat people fairly. Maya was surprised by the admission. We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them. I hope I have. And Maya, congratulations on completing your century ride. I looked up your fundraising page afterward and was impressed by what you accomplished. I made a donation to the Pediatric Cancer Research Fund. As Dr. Collins walked away, Maya felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. The conflict had been resolved not just through HR intervention, but through genuine acknowledgement and change. It was a reminder that even difficult people could grow and improve when confronted with the consequences of their actions. The following weekend, Maya was out on her regular training ride when she encountered another cyclist who had crashed on the same section of trail where she'd lost her helmet. The rider, a woman in her 40s, was sitting on the ground looking dazed and discouraged. "Are you okay?" Maya asked, stopping to help. "I think so," the woman replied. "Just shaken up. I've been trying to get back into cycling after my divorce, and this feels like a sign that I should give up." Maya recognized the defeatist tone and the way the woman was letting one setback define her entire journey. "I crashed on this exact spot a few months ago," Maya said. "Lost my helmet and thought about quitting my training. But you know what? Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best discoveries." "What do you mean?" Maya helped the woman to her feet and checked her bike for damage. "I learned that the strength I thought I needed to find outside myself was actually inside me all along. The crash wasn't a sign to quit. It was a test of whether I really wanted to keep going." The woman smiled for the first time since the crash. "You know what? You're right. I'm not going to let a little tumble stop me from getting my life back." As Maya watched the woman ride away, she reflected on how the lessons from her own journey kept presenting opportunities to help others. The letter Diego had hidden in her helmet had been destroyed, but the wisdom it contained had multiplied, spreading from person to person like ripples in a pond. 3 months later, Maya was promoted to a senior physical therapy position at the hospital. Dr. Collins had actually recommended her for the role, citing her professionalism, patient care skills, and leadership potential. Maya accepted the promotion gratefully, knowing that her ability to stand up for herself had ultimately earned her supervisor's respect. In her new role, Maya made it a priority to mentor junior staff members and create a supportive work environment. She remembered how isolating it had felt to face Dr. Collins' harassment alone, and she was determined to ensure that other employees felt supported and valued. One of her first initiatives was to establish a peer support program for staff members dealing with workplace conflicts. She worked with HR to create clear procedures for reporting problems and to ensure that employees knew their rights and options. This is exactly the kind of leadership we need, Janet Walsh told Maya during one of their planning meetings. You've turned a negative experience into something that will benefit everyone. Maya also continued her cycling, training for even longer events and raising money for various charitable causes. She'd learned that physical challenges were often metaphors for life challenges, and that the endurance and determination developed on the bike translated directly to personal and professional situations. Diego visited home for the holidays, and Maya took him to see her new helmet display in her apartment. She'd mounted the fragments of her broken helmet alongside photos from the Century ride and a framed certificate of completion. "It's beautiful," Diego said, studying the display. "You've turned something broken into something inspiring." "I learned that from you," Maya replied. "Remember when you were sick and you kept that journal of all the small victories? You taught me that setbacks don't define us. How we respond to them does." Diego smiled. "I still have that journal. Maybe I should display it too, as a reminder of what's possible when you refuse to give up." As they talked, Maya realized that the cycle of encouragement and strength had come full circle once again. She'd found courage in Diego's letter, lost it in the crash, rediscovered it within herself, and now was passing it on to others. The physical letter was gone, but its spirit lived on in every person who chose to keep going when giving up would have been easier. A year after the Century ride, Maya was invited to speak at a hospital conference about workplace leadership and conflict resolution. She stood at the podium, looking out at an audience of healthcare professionals, and thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. "A year ago, I was a physical therapy assistant who was being bullied by her supervisor," Maya began. "I could have quit, transferred departments, or just accepted the unfair treatment. Instead, I chose to stand up for myself and my values. That decision changed not just my career but my entire understanding of what it means to be strong." She talked about the importance of documentation, the value of seeking support from HR, and the courage required to confront workplace injustice. But she also spoke about the deeper lessons she'd learned about resilience, self-advocacy, and the power of refusing to let other people's limitations become your ceiling. "The most important thing I learned," Maya concluded, "is that the strength we need to overcome challenges isn't something we have to find outside ourselves. It's something we develop through practice, through standing up for what's right, and through refusing to give up when things get difficult." The audience gave her a standing ovation, and afterward, several people approached her to share their own stories of workplace conflicts and personal challenges. Maya listened to each story with compassion and offered encouragement, knowing that her willingness to share her experience was helping others find their own courage. As Maya drove home from the conference, she thought about the broken helmet fragments on her dresser and the letter that had once been hidden inside. She no longer needed external reminders of her strength because she'd learned to recognize it within herself. The crash had destroyed the helmet, but it had revealed something far more valuable: the unbreakable spirit that had been there all along. Maya's story spread throughout the hospital and beyond, inspiring other employees to stand up for themselves and their values. She became known as someone who would listen to workplace concerns and offer practical advice about navigating conflicts. Several months later, Maya received a letter from a young physical therapy student who had heard her speak at the conference. The student wrote about facing discrimination in her program and feeling hopeless about her future career. Maya's story had given her the courage to file a complaint with the school's administration and to continue pursuing her goals despite the obstacles. Your example showed me that sometimes the hardest battles are the most important ones to fight, the student wrote. Thank you for proving that ordinary people can make extraordinary changes when they refuse to accept unfair treatment. Maya kept the letter in her desk drawer, next to a photo of her completing the Century ride. It was a reminder that courage was contagious, that standing up for yourself could inspire others to do the same, and that the ripple effects of one person's bravery could extend far beyond their own situation. The final chapter of Maya's story came 2 years after the Century ride, when she was offered a position as the director of physical therapy at a larger hospital across town. It was a significant promotion that would have been impossible if she'd remained in the toxic environment Dr. Collins had created. On her last day at Riverside Medical Center, Maya cleaned out her office and said goodbye to her colleagues. Dr. Collins approached her with a small wrapped package. "I wanted to give you this," Dr. Collins said, looking somewhat embarrassed. "It's not much, but I thought you might appreciate it." Maya unwrapped the package to find a small plaque that read, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it." Below the quote was an engraving. "To Maya Rodriguez, thank you for showing me what leadership really means." Dr. Collins, this is beautiful, thank you. "I learned a lot from watching how you handled our conflict," Dr. Collins said. "You never let anger or resentment drive your actions. You stayed professional and focused on what was right, not what was easy. That's real strength." As Maya drove away from the hospital for the last time, she thought about the unexpected gift from her former supervisor. The plaque would join the broken helmet fragments on her dresser, both serving as reminders of challenges overcome and lessons learned. In her new position, Maya implemented the peer support programs she developed at Riverside and continued to mentor staff members facing workplace difficulties. She also continued cycling, now training for ultra-distance events that would take her across multiple states. But the most important legacy of her journey wasn't professional or athletic. It was personal. Maya had learned that true strength came not from avoiding challenges, but from facing them with integrity and persistence. She discovered that the encouragement she'd sought in Diego's letter had been inside her all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The broken helmet still sat on her dresser, its fragments catching the light each morning as Maya prepared for another day of helping others find their own strength. She no longer mourned the lost letter because she'd learned that the most powerful words of encouragement were the ones you spoke to yourself when no one else was listening. Maya Rodriguez had set out to ride 100 miles for charity and had ended up discovering something far more valuable: the unshakable knowledge that she was strong enough to overcome any obstacle, brave enough to stand up for what was right, and wise enough to turn her struggles into stepping stones for others. The helmet was broken, but the spirit it had protected was stronger than ever. And that, Maya knew, was a victory that no one could ever take away.